already here or what? Let's see. And Jasmine, hello. Oh, good. I'm already logged in here. That's helpful. Okay, so meetings, fill 9, share content. Okay, now before we actually begin some of that practice that I hope will be helpful to us in terms of the reinforcement of ideas we've begun discussing in first order logic. And then also will maybe give rise to some questions, because you guys always have really good questions. But before we do that, does anybody have any residual from our previous meetings, questions, problems, confusions, comments, anything that you want to get to? Okay, well, if something comes up, let me know. Meanwhile, we started our first order logic material with chapter 21, and we've been kind of roaming around, sometimes out of order, sometimes in at least some order, the material presented. So we've been in chapters 21 through 25. All right, so how about these guys? So um hmm. And by the way, as I'm writing these out, if there's, per usual, if there's something that if anything I've written is illegible, let me know. But what I hope that you'll be doing is sort of sketching out how you go about translating these, and then go ahead and start throwing your translations into the chat. Okay. Also, either speak or chat or type any questions that you have as you're working through them. Um, okay. So let's start with these five. Um, First, we can read through them, make sure that we know what it is that I've written. So the first sentence reads as follows: only class members are in the room. Number 2 reads, used cars are good if and only if they were well maintained. I'm going to go ahead and change actually the were to present tense. 3, everyone likes textbooks. 4, a dog is barking. And 5, a dog is not a cat. So if you go back to your thinking about translations, if you go back to our work in sentential logic when we translated compound sentences by way of their atomic constituents and the relevant connectives, right? You had some process that you used. You either identified what the atomic sentence or sentences were in the compound sentence first, or you identified the connective or connectives first, right? So you sort of dismantled the sentence. And you're going to do the same thing here, right? We've been doing this together already, but now let's talk about a specific approach to translations. So what you want to think about doing, and not necessarily in this order, but you do want to ask yourself what the quantity of the sentence is. Are we talking about, a universal or an existential? Obviously, if there's a singular sentence, that is a sentence that involves a name or an individual constant, right? We're going to notate accordingly. But we want to make sure that since that's not the case here, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the quantifier. And then we also want to think about what our predicates are, right? So remember that the quantifier, ranges across the variable iterations, right? So the variable is the term or the object that we're talking about, and then the nouns or noun phrases, sometimes adverbs, right? Things like that. Those are our predicates, our properties. So we want to think about how many of those we have. Don't forget that you also want to use your go-to forms, right? Remember the 4 Aristotelian forms? You want to use those go-to forms as like templates that will help you build a sentence. Okay, so the first sentence reads, only class members are in the room. So what do you want to do first? Do you want to think about what our predicates are, or do you want to think about the quantity, universal or existential? Universal means everything in the class in question. Existential means at least one. So which one do you want to work with first? Quantity or predicate? Okay, Jasmine says predicates. Sure, why not? Okay, so does everybody already have an idea of what predicates we're talking about in sentence 1? And think about it this way. We're talking about things that are, right, blank, things that are blank. And I'll start us off with a pair of parentheses that aren't very beautifully drawn. What do you think? Thank you, Dominic. What are your predicates? And if you're not sure, go ahead and take a stab. Okay, so Jasmine's talking about things that are in the room. So, remember in our text, we have the opportunity to write out the predicate in long form or short form, where in long form, we could do this: in the room, or we could just write room, or we could just write are. Right? So for the sake of time, why don't we just say are? So things in the room. Now, am I putting this are with the variable on at the end of our logically notated sentence because it comes at the end of the at the end of the ordinary English sentence? Yes. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But so we've got things in the room. Now, remember, this copula with the conjugation of the verb to be is what in our ordinary English sentence, right, tells us about the grammatical predicate coming up, right? But remember that in the system of logic that we're studying now, we take the unspecified entities to be our subjects, right? Effectively, things, X, Y, Z, variables, right? Things. And then the nouns or noun phrases, right, are what we notate with predicates. So are effectively becomes our arrow. And you might say, well, why is it an arrow? Well, I'm kind of now, I've spoiled the mystery of the quantifier here, but we'll put an arrow. Okay. And then, so then that leaves what? Class members as our other predicate. And again, we could write out class members. We could write out just C or M, right? And notice here, when I wrote out the phrase class member, I used the singular because we're talking about things that are, right? So the predication is class membership. So how about this? Okay. Now we've got to ask ourselves what the quantifier is. Is it a universal? Sorry, let me do it this way. Is it a universal or is it an existential? So what you're going to want to do is take a look at the word only. Does it make sense to say that only is exhaustive? How about this? Go back to your prior understanding of the phrase only if, right? So something like this, I go to the movies only if you do, tells me that if I go to the movies, then you must also be there, or you must be there, right? So only is the formulation that we use. It's one of two formulations that we use to refer to what becomes an if-then relationship, right? When we're talking about unspecified entities, okay? Notice also that only covers the class members, okay? So is it fair to say then that we've got a universal? But we still have a question. And per usual, I've made us run out of room. So let me make a slight adjustment because we've got a question to answer. Which is, oh, really? R twice, Mia? That's good. That's good. That works. Sure, why not? Okay. So here's the question. Which one is correct? Choice A or choice B? What do you think? And then we'll talk about the why. Which translation is correct? A or B? Is it the case that the predicate class members goes in the antecedent position, or is it the case that people in the room goes into the antecedent position? Okay, so Dominic has given us a choice. What do other people think? Does anybody disagree with Dominic? Agree, disagree, agree, disagree. Okay, hold tight. So I'm going to rewrite this. Only class members are in the room. Okay, Victoria's made a really, really good point. So let me go ahead and write this out. Let's rephrase this. What you've said slightly. The sentence is not. Is not about every class member. That's Victoria. Oh, sorry, Victoria. I used a C, not a K. Hold on. Jasmine says not all class members are in the room. Perhaps, right? So that's not the claim that's being made. But everyone in the room is a class member. Okay, so let's take these two terrific ideas that Victoria and Jasmine have provided and talk through them. Dominic, thank you for going back into your original choice and saying, okay, what am I supposed to think when I see this phrase only, right? And the scope is covers the class members, right? We don't know where else the class members might be, right? So we're not saying every class member is in the room. What we are saying, though, is that people in the room are class members. Okay, so I'm going to combine the two here, right? So we don't know, given the sentence, right? Sorry, rephrase. We don't know, given what the sentence asserts, where else the class members might be. But we know, we know that if you, whoever you are, right, if you are in the room, and now we get the translation, right? You are a class member. So, nicely done. We get for every X, if X is in the room, then X is a class member. Sweet. Well done. Okay. So here's a translation tip that you can use. Similarly to the phrase only if back in sentences that were dealt with in singular terms, when you see only if, you know that whatever comes immediately after the phrase only if goes in the consequent position. In sentences involving quantification, when you see only, whatever comes immediately after only goes in the consequent position, right? So it's that exclusive position, the necessary condition. Okay, really good. Alternatively, just as an FYI, and we can map out a sentence. When you see the only, right, then you translate in the order that the animals appear, that the elements appear. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our original guy, and we're going to say, it's not this one, right? It's this one. Okay. Now, remember that sorry, no, I already said this. Forget it. Let's move on to the second exercise. Used cars are good if and only if they are well maintained. So, we know as a matter of reference that the they refers back to, the used cars. So we're talking about things that we're saying, right? Rephrase. I shouldn't have said that. It was going to end up being a very convoluted sentence. Remember that we're saying that there are things that have properties of being used cars. These self-same things have the property of being well maintained. Victoria, what are you thinking?
Excuse me, I just wanted to ask you, could I say something like that? Some class member are in the room. So actually, I wrote it on the chat.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't see it. There it is. Okay.
Sorry that I returned to the first one, but I just wanted to ask, is it okay or not?
No, don't apologize. That's what we're here for. I love it. Good. Keep doing it. Okay. So, so there are a couple ways to think about the what the sentence is saying to us. Are we allowed to say, as an inference, that if only class members are in the room, that there is at least one class member in the room? So, as an inference, can we move from the universal to the existential? The answer is yes. But I think what you're asking is whether or not the existential claim is logically identical to the universal, right? And so one way to answer that question is to do this, to say, okay, can I go through a series of steps where I'm writing out logically equivalent sentences and then get to the existential, right? So it would be something like this. And by the way, I want us to talk through it because, oh no, let me do another whiteboard. I want us to talk through it because if you've got this question and you're thinking about, how you might go about answering it, what I'm offering is kind of one way for us to approach it, as opposed to just saying, yes, Victoria, you're correct, or no, Victoria, you're incorrect, right? So just to confirm, you're asking about equivalence, that this sentence says logically the same thing as this other sentence,
Yeah.
as opposed to the inference from one to the other. Okay, so the question is this sentence, here's our question, the same as saying there is something, it is a class member, and it's in the room. Okay, so the question, the way, here's how I would think about doing this. And again, it's not the only or the best approach, but it's one approach you could take. You could say, okay, well, here's what I know. I know already that there are equivalences, right? From, rephrase. There are equivalences between universal and existential claims, right? We saw that on, what's today, Thursday? We saw that on Tuesday, right? So what I could do is see if I can manipulate, right, the internal structure of the thing, work a quantifier exchange to see if I can get to the sentence I want. So it would go something like this. So I'm going to leave my universal. First thing I'm going to do is perform a truth functional equivalence, right? Then what I'm going to do is push my negation out. So then I would end up with this sentence. Here's our De Morgans, right? And then I know that I can push through the so De Morgans for quantifiers. I can push the negation out and I get this. Right? So far as the sorry, I got distracted by something. So far as the negations go, right, you don't have a sentence that's equivalent, right? What you could say is, well, I can get to my existential, but I'm not saying exactly the same thing logically. Does that answer your question? So the final sentence says it's not the case that there is something that's in the room and not a class member. Because remember, only class members are in the room. So whatever is in the room must be a class member. The claim that you originally queried says, it's a limited claim. It says there is at least something, it's a class member and it's in the room. And indeed that is true, right? But it doesn't give us the exhaustiveness that the universal does, where we're saying that things in the room are restricted to class members. Does that help or no?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, of course. Great question. Yeah, we want to keep doing these. We want to keep asking these sorts of questions. I think for a couple of reasons. I mean, for what it's worth, when we get into more complicated translations, some people will say, "Oh my gosh, this is so much easier than the stuff we were doing before." And I say, "Well, that's great. Good for you. I'm delighted." I can tell you from my own experience, I have a much harder time with more complicated, especially with more complicated quantified sentences. I'll share with you why that is as we get there. But that's why I think kind of finding your path to working through answering your own question is a good thing to do. Because I know, when I, at least in my, if my memory is correct, I would run up against these questions and I didn't like a textbook didn't quite give me the answer that I wanted. I had to make sense of it for myself and then like check back with the text to make sure that I hadn't changed anything, right? Because like I said, the textbooks just weren't putting things in quite the presenting ideas in quite a way that clicked for me, right? And it just took me a while. So for what it's worth. All right, so let's go back. So let's go ahead now. We worked through the first one together. Jasmine said initially, I like thinking about, or I want to think about the predicates first. Why don't we now think about the quantifier first? We'll just go back and forth. What is the implied quantity? Every used car or at least one? Could be all, but we don't know. Is that what the sentence says? Everyone, or could be one, at least one, could be all, but we just don't know. Okay, so Jasmine is going for the existential. Question for you, Jasmine. I'm going to ask you to cast your eyeballs, if you would, down to sentence 4 and sentence 5. And you've got the article A starting the sentence out in each case. Is it fair, though, given what you know about, ordinary English sentences, is it fair to say that the article's quantity is different in each one? Right, but Jasmine, in which one? In number 4 or number 5? And I think you mean not singular, but an existential. A singular, in the terminology that we've adopted, a singular claim is a claim about a named entity. Right, so a singular sentence that we can translate into predicate form, right? Yeah, would be Walter is barking, or Eddie is barking. So I'm asking you to think about that, because what we want to do when we either don't see a quantifier, let me rephrase that. What we want to do when we don't see a quantifier is ask what the sort of our ordinary usage is. I don't know what the statistics are, maybe there aren't any, but quite often when we don't assert the universal, it's implied. That said, as you can see from 4 and 5, it's not always implied. So what Victoria's saying is that we're talking about every used car. Any used car you want to talk about is good, if and only if it's well maintained. Okay? So we've got the universal. Now, how many things do we, rephrase, how many predicates do we have? We've got things that are used, things that are cars, things that are good, and things that are, well maintained. Okay, so we got that. Now, let's take a look at, I don't have my little bar here. Let's take a look at the connectives that jump out at us, right off the bat. We've got if and only if, right? That whole phrase, as we know, is a biconditional. And then remember, we've got the conjugation of the verb to be. So are is translated standardly, let me rephrase this. Are is standardly translated by or with, sorry, with is the correct formulation, with conditional or ampersand, right? Depending on whether or not it's a universal. One question for us is, do we replace each iteration of the verb are with an arrow? Okay, so we've got this. Okay, so we've got things that are used, things that are cars, things that are good, things that are well maintained. Is it fair to say that if and only if, by way of the punctuation, tells us that the two-way arrow is our main connective, right? So we've got things that are well maintained. I'm sure I will run out of room because, per my usual, I don't visualize these things very well. Okay, so we've got things that are used, things that are cars, things that are good, and yeah, gonna have to do it, aren't I? Hold on, everybody. Let's move this bad boy over. Okay, so let's try again. Things that are used, things that are cars, things that are good, if and only if, things that are well maintained. I'm just going to use an M. And once again, I've screwed up. Okay. So now we need to think about the connective that goes with used cars, right? So I'm specifying the domain of used things, the domain of car things, the domain of good things, right? When you've got an adjective, right, modifying the noun, it should be the case. I mean, I don't know. I haven't crunched the numbers, but it should be the case that you've got a conjunction, right? So things that are used, things that are cars are good. But now we need to do what? We need to make sure, let me go ahead and get a different set of colors here so that it's clear. What we need to do is get our parentheses in order, right? Because right now this sentence is not logically grammatical, right? It is not fully well formed. So let's go back to our standard universal, right? If we're talking about the sentence used cars are good, we've got everything used in a car. Come on, Mia. Everything used in a car is good. But then don't we need another pair of parentheses to highlight or specify, I should say, the fact that the biconditional is the main connective. I'm just going to put another one here because it'll make it easier. Okay, what do we think? Now, Victoria, you wrote we have they, right?
Yeah. So I thought that we have something like we have return used and cars
Yes.
are well maintained.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, you get that we don't need to reiterate cars because that they just refers back to cars, which we've already mentioned. Does that seem right?
No, no. So I think we need rate because it's like yeah,
Well,
because it's
can we
about
try?
like full atomic sentence.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. And I don't know if I'm actually keying in on the issue that I don't know if what I'm about to say addresses the issue you're raising. I want to key in on the following. Remember, our variable is the object, right? So you've got things in the universe, right? So for everything that is used and a car, it's good if and only if it, right, is well maintained. So did you see me circling the variable there? So only if it, that's a reference back to the they, is well maintained. Think about it, and then what I'm going to do is ask you to so I think what you want to do is something like this. And by the way, it's not like it's not like you will generate, to the best of my knowledge anyway, a logically incorrect sentence. I think what you want to do is this. You want to say, the question, my big question is, do we need the second do we need the repetition of things that are used, things that and things that are cars? But hold tight. So you're saying no, let's maintain here, you know, the arrow, right? So it's going to look like this. So then we're saying used and car. Right, that's what you want. Okay. So then we're saying, so now we're saying all used cars are good if and only if those used cars are well maintained. So that's my attempt at trying to collapse a little bit the mouthful of the symbolic logic notation with the ordinary English. So from the standpoint of just reading the sentence as the symbolic logic notation dictates, we can get this. For every x, if x is used and a car, then it's well maintained if and only if x is used and a car. Sorry, I said good. Forgive me, let me try one more time. From the beginning, back to one, as they say. For every x, if x is used and a car, then it's good if and only if x is used and a car and well maintained. Now I know I'm sort of slipping the English in there. Only if and only if x is used and a car, then it's well maintained. Right? So you get a bit more of a mouthful in there than you really need. Because remember, the thing that's the same in each one of these cases, right, is the variable. It's covered by the universal. So you don't need to reiterate the thing being a used car. It's already asserted. Okay, so Jasmine, I'm getting it, but for things that are used and things that are cars, can you, oh, great question, Jasmine. Okay, so the answer to your question is this: is in the sentence, is car a specified entity, right? So think about it this way. If you wanted to say, my Honda, right, or this Honda, right, then we've got a name of a car. On the other hand, Hondas or Honda is also what we predicate of various things, right? So we could say, if we wanted to say, all Hondas are not economy cars, whatever, fuel efficient. All Hondas are fuel efficient. Yes, Honda is the name, but we're talking about the things that are Hondas, right? So we would have Honda X, right? Fuel efficient X. So now coming back to your question about translating. So let me go ahead and erase this real quick. So you're thinking about this, Jasmine. Tell me if I've got your translation correct. You're saying, could we do something like this? And let's not worry about the if and only if, because your question has to do with whether or not we can use the lowercase letter c. Short story. The lowercase letter c in our version of the system is a constant or a name. So, suppose that I named my car Charlie, right? We'd say that Charlie is used, right? But the sentence is talking about cars, not this car or that car, not a named car, not a specifically identified car, right? And even if we do say there is one and only one car in the lot, we're still using the variable because we haven't specified the car, we haven't named the car. Does that am I making sense? Have I answered your question? Right? So we're talking about used things, car things. I know it's not very elegant to say that. Car things, good things, well maintained things, right? So variable, right? Variable, 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 variable. Unless I want to say my car Charlie, right? So, I've named my cars. Have I answered your question? Does that make sense? Okay, Jasmine, let's look, because I want to make sure now's the time for us to clear up the confusion. So hold on, let me save all this stuff, and then let's go into the textbook, because I want to see what you're looking at. Let's make sure that we clarify. So hold on for just 1 second. Okay, so where I am right now is in section 2 of chapter 23. So it should be the case, and forgive me because I'm still trying to commit the section breakdowns to memory. I think we want chapter 21, section 1. But tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so let's find the spot that is that has prompted you to say, wait a second, I should be able to use lowercase c. Here's what I hear you saying. I should be able to use lowercase c and have that stand for unspecified cars. Is that right? And if so, if you so let's read through this together. Let's see if I can find the part. All right, so we're talking about things, objects, terms, right? There are named things and unnamed things, right? The named things we symbolize in a specific way, and the unnamed things we symbolize with variables, X, Y, Z, right? So, constants and names are the same thing. Like, remember when I was talking, I gave, sentences about, Walter barking or something like that, right? Or Walter's in the backyard, or when we were talking about the identity symbol, Walter's identical to Wawa. Or, I said Lady Gaga is identical to Stephanie, right? We use the lowercase full name or lowercase letter, okay? So then we get short form, long form. We get if we need to use one name to stand for multiple individuals, we will just use like a subscript or typically subscript, 1, 2, 3, Arabic numerals for shorthand, blah blah blah. Of course, that's not subscript, but that's okay. So far, remember for our variables, right? We've got the standard is lowercase xyz. Although depending on the range, like so I use W for Walter, but there are times when you need more variables than XYZ, right? So some will use STUVWXYZ, in which case I wouldn't be able to use W for Walter, right? So how you specify the variable, right, is going to determine how you use it. Okay, so far nothing in there about using a name to stand for a predicate, right? So remember what you're doing, Jasmine, is you're saying, I want to take cars, right, which is a category of thing, and you want to use the lowercase c. Okay, so Jasmine, okay. Right. So when so let's revisit this because this is worthwhile. But first, let's just run through 21.2 just to make sure there's nothing in here that that we want to clarify. Okay, so in each of these cases, right, we've got individual people, named people, right? So in this case, as you say, Pia and Quinn, right? We can use short form, long form. And the grammatical subject, right? Pia drinks coffee. Quinn is innocent. The grammatical subject, Pia, Quinn, is what takes the predicate, right? So we're predicating something of Pia, namely in this case, happiness, right? Or coffee drinking, right? So what this notation allows us to do is represent the logical structure of the sentence in greater detail and more clarity, right? So that this is, in terms of singular sentences, our predicate logic takes an individual constant and a predicate, right? But remember, the singular sentence is about an individually named thing. When we don't have a name, then we've got something or everything, right? Even when we do want to say there is exactly one thing, right? So suppose I say to you, there is exactly one dog in the room, but I'm not telling you which dog. I don't tell you that it's Ed or Stewie or Walter, right? Or H or Ella. I just say there's exactly one dog in the room. I'm still talking about this unnamed entity, so it takes a variable. Okay? But I'm really, really glad you brought this up, and thank you, Victoria, for saying, hey, Mia, pay attention. Jasmine's got a question. Okay, so let's go back to, unless there's something else in here that you want to look at. Okay, of course. Oh my gosh, of course. All right, so you know what I did when I stopped the share, even though I saved the whiteboard, I forgot the sentences that I can't call up the sentences again on that old whiteboard. So, sorry about that. I'm always screwing something up. You guys are used to it. Let's do this. Okay, so, oh, thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, so this was number 3. Everyone likes, oh, thank you. Everyone likes textbooks. Number 4 was a dog. Thank you. Awesome. A dog is barking, and thank you. A dog is not a cat. And then 5, a dog is not a cat. Okay, so, so you know, like, if we go back to the used cars example, and Victoria was asking this great question about, you know, how whether or not we need to kind of reiterate a domain of discourse, right? And my vote was no, don't need to reiterate it, but there's nothing wrong with you if you do. Then I said, but you know, there are times when I think, so I'm not talking about reiterating a domain of discourse. I'm talking about specifying a domain of discourse. And the domain of discourse in number 3, you can either assume is limited to people, because presumably nobody but people likes textbooks, except maybe, you know, worms eating a textbook or something like that, right? Do worms eat textbooks? Doesn't matter. Point is that, you know, our ordinary English says, oh, shoot, sorry. Our ordinary English, right, you know, assumes that we know the domain of discourse is limited to textbooks, right? Or sorry, to people. But what we could do is say, all right, we're going to specify persons, right? So then we've got the following. We've got persons, or person would be the singular, right? And then we've got textbooks. And then we've got the likes relation, right? So notice what we're going to have to push into. And I know I'm anticipating next week's work, but why not? Let's push a little bit here. We can assert the likes relationship in terms of, you know, something reflective, right? So I could say, you know, Zeba likes Zeba, where Zeba is this one and the same, right? So Zeba likes herself would be the way that we would say it in ordinary English, right? But you know what we're talking about here is persons and textbooks, and persons and textbooks aren't the same thing. So the question that we want to ask is this, and notice I'm using a why. The question we want to ask is this: what's liking the textbooks? Persons. So X is liking Y, right? How many persons? Everyone. And generally textbooks? Everyone. Now, I just want to throw this out there for you so that it's not unfamiliar when you get to the chapter and we begin the discussion of multiple quantifiers. Remember that a variable, XYZ is our standard set. A variable is a placeholder. So I could, without violating any logical restriction, I could instantiate or name X and Y the same, right? And you'd say, well, why would you do that? Persons and textbooks just can't be the same thing. True, but logic doesn't know that. So why do I use an X and a Y? Why don't I just use X's? Well, it helps us to see which quantifier is going with which predicate. So that's my short answer for right now. Okay. So now, alternatively, you could say, I don't want to specify the domain of discourse includes or is restricted to persons, right? So remember, there was, I think it was in 21.2 or 23.1. I'd have to go back and look, and I don't want to leave the whiteboard, but the text talks about how you're at a shelter and or at an animal shelter and somebody brings in a box of snakes, right? What's in there? Snakes. Oh, they're all snakes. And we know the domain of discourse is limited to this box. So when you use universal X, snake X, right, you're not saying everything in the universe is a snake, but so my view is this, right? Unless you know what the context is, strictly speaking, universal X, snake X says everything is a snake without the specified context, without the domain of discourse being carved out more explicitly. You could be saying everything is a snake, right? All right, so that's just my 2 cents. That said, what our text has to say about why we shouldn't interpret the universal that way makes very good sense. So I do not intend to contradict the textbook or critique it or undermine it. I'm just saying that I have this preference for wanting more specification than less. Okay. All right. So one way you could approach the thing is this. You could say, for every X and for every Y, right? If X is a person and Y is a textbook, then X likes Y. Oh, whoops, sorry. This is one way to translate pre-next form where you put your quantifiers out front. You can also nest your quantifiers. Some people like what I've just written. That's intellectually comfortable for them. Some people want the quantifier pushed through, in which case you get universal X. Oops. Universal Y. And notice that the parentheses tell you, so let's separate out our universals, right? that X ranges across all of the iterations of X, right? So, sorry, that universal ranges across all iterations of X. And then this Y ranges across all iterations of Y. Okay. I don't know if anybody's perplexed by why in the A version, we have a conjunction, and in the second version, we have an arrow. But if you go, so let's think about some truth functionality here. If we go back to our propositional logic, we should have seen the following equivalence. So let me do it this way. So here's the equivalence. A and B arrow C is truth functionally equivalent to if A, then if B, then C. So that maps on here to the sentences that are quantified, and it allows us to more accurately express the relationship between the domain of X's and the domain of Y's in the two separate sentences. Okay. So again, I want to just walk through that just to address a point that I had wanted to make earlier, and to also kind of have us give us an example of some things we're going to want to think about so that when we are confronted with the multiple quantifiers and so forth, we say, oh, okay, I've seen it before. Nothing to be afraid of. All right, so 4 and 5. A dog is barking, a dog is not a cat. So let's go back to asking about quantifiers. The article A in one case means there is at least one. In the other case, it means everyone. How can you tell the difference? Well, we just think about what we mean when, based on our understanding of ordinary English, what we mean when we say, oh, a dog's barking versus a dog's not a cat, right? So which one is the universal? Is it 4 or 5? And if you're not sure, let's rework the sentence. A dog is not a cat. No dogs are cats, right? A dog is barking. Some dog is barking. You know, think about, if you're not sure about quantification, think about how you can restate the sentence, reword the sentence, but preserve the meaning. Okay, is it clearer then? Which is which? Go ahead and translate. Use your standard existential and universal. Existential affirmative, universal negative. What's it going to look like? Tell me what to write. And I hope that you are looking back at your notes or your, what's it called? Or the text, right? Where you see the 4 Aristotelian forms. Okay. All right. Dominic. Yeah, Dominic for 5. That's great. Yeah. So Dominic says, For every X, if X is a dog, then it's not the case that X is a cat. Beautiful. And now Victoria, for 4, everything is great, but you've used an arrow. So we can talk more about why we want to avoid using an arrow, although it does happen, can happen, but why it's sort of in a standard translation, we want to avoid using an arrow for an existential. So we're going to do this. Something is a dog and barking. So here's a loose way of reading back out the sentence that you wrote. There is something, if it's a dog, then it's barking. What do we think? Are you comfortable with 4 as an existential? Okay, let's finish up with, how about this? Okay, so every dog is either a pit bull or a Labrador, and we're assuming that we know the context for the domain of discourse, right? Is maybe, this fixed group that I'm talking about, so suppose, you go to that shelter that our textbook was talking about, and one of the volunteers says, every dog here is either a pit or a lab. Right? We know we're not talking about every dog in the universe, so the domain is restricted. How is that going to look? What translation do you have? And let's use D for dog, P for pit bull, L for Labrador. Okay, so we've got, I feel like we're at time, and so I rushed through that last explanation. I thought it was really convoluted. So if it was really convoluted, I apologize. Tell me and I'll restate it. But let's end with that translation. We can come back and I'll try to, if you can keep your original translation, Jasmine and Dominic, maybe we can pick up with that on Tuesday. Just talk a little bit more about what the issue is with each one of those. Okay? In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your week. If I don't see you before Tuesday, I hope see you on Tuesday. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks.